Chapter 34, Mistaken Identity.
What is taking so long?
Dr. Crowning yelled so hard at Pandorè that phlegm shot out of his mouth like a ravaging animal. He cradled his injured and bloody hand while Pandorè busily prepared the collider in the main mirror room.
Just one more adjustment should do it,
said Pandorè. He attempted to stay calm, although his hands were shaking. He knew what he would have to do, and that he had to do it quickly without raising any flags of suspicion. Pandorè adjusted the gems that Dr. Crowning had collected. He saw the onyx stone Dr. Crowning had stolen from Joel's grandfather and several other gems. Each gemstone rested on the priestly breastplate they had replicated to look like Aaron's from the Bible. Suddenly, Ishani came rushing through the door.
"What is it? Did you get what I've asked for?"
demanded Dr. Crowning.
"Of course, Doctor."
Ishani proudly held out her hands to display Rachel's jewels, her sapphire, diamond, and amethyst from her engagement ring. Lydia's gemstones were included from her jewelry as well, primarily her agate stone that Dr. Crowning had pried from her necklace and used in the other mysterious mirror. Ishani also held Rachel's bracelet with 2 more sapphires and a piece of the sardius stone that once belonged to Annika. Pandorè was enraged, but somehow he held it in. He knew that Ishani must have gotten to Rachel and Ivan before they escaped. Were they still alive? Dr. Crowning held out his one hand.
It's small, but they should still do the job. Pandorè, take these and insert them into the device at once. This has to work. People are gathering outside to hear me as we speak.
Pandorè quickly scooped up the jewels and began constructing them into the breastplate while Ishani promptly exited.
She has to be alive, she just has to be.
Pandorè thought to himself. He had to find out and get her and Ivan to safety if possible. He began placing bits of jewels into the breastplate. As they matched up with their other pieces, they merged like magnets. There were no visible lines once each one had wholly connected. Pandorè needed an excuse.
Just a moment, Dr. Crowning. The required spacing for each jewel needs to be precisely adjusted. I must get a tool from my office to speed things up.
Just get it done before I bleed to death,
he growled, gripping his hand. Pandorè quickly exited and closed the door behind him. On his way back to his office, he noticed a trail of blood. It led from the middle of the hallway to Ivan's office. No one was around, so Pandorè followed it. The sticky drips led straight to Ivan's office, but the door was locked. Pandorè swiped his key to get inside. Ivan was slumped against his couch on the floor, his eyes still open in shock. Blood trickled from his mouth. When Pandorè touched his lifeless body, it fell to one side, revealing the massive gunshot wound to his back that went clear through his chest. Pandorè gasped and began to look around in a wild panic.
Rachel, are you here?
There was no answer, only dead silence. Pandorè checked to ensure there was no sign of life, and he could tell that rigor mortis was already taking effect. Then he found a folded piece of paper in Ivan's shirt pocket. It was addressed to Pandorè.
Dear Thomas, Pandorè, if you are reading this now, I am dead. First, please know I am sorry for deceiving you all these years about dear Rachel and your Annika. I only did it to protect us, as all our lives were at stake. It was Dr. Crowning and Ishani. They had Annika murdered, altering her mind and making her a willing sacrifice for their evil schemes. They kidnapped your daughter, whom I named Rachel. They are sacrificing innocent people, especially of the Jewish bloodline, and using their ancient gemstones to boost their experiments. As you know, they have discovered evil forces to create new technologies, such as hybrid beings, autonomous healing capabilities, teleportation, and no telling what else. They are trying to be their own gods. Instead of worshipping our one true God, they have turned to devils and idolatry. I cannot help but believe, no, I know now that Ishani stole away Rachel to raise up another sacrifice, a virgin sacrifice. Despite their attempts, they will find that love has conquered all. Thomas, you must have Jewish origin in your bloodline as well. That is why Ishani kept Rachel monitored so closely. She wants her life, her purity, and Joel's family jewels, of which she has undoubtedly acquired some by now. Pandorè, you have to save her. Save Rachel before it's too late. Godspeed, my brother, Ivan.
Although Pandorè had recently suspected much of what Ivan had written, his words proved any suspicions true. Despite it all, he was grateful to have had Ivan as his friend. Pandorè wiped away the tears streaming down his face. He pushed his hand into his pocket and looked at his watch, its sardius stone glowing slightly. Then he shoved it back into his pocket along with the note and rushed back toward his office. Ben was startled and began to whine, sensing Pandora's panic.
Rachel! Rachel, are you here?
Pandorè tried to keep his voice low. He opened the hatch to the tunnels and took Ben down the ladder. His feet touched the icy ground.
Hold it right there,
said a soldier's voice. Pandorè held up his hands and another soldier grabbed Ben, who yelped in response. Guards lined the tunnel.
You're not going anywhere until you finish the job. We'll escort you back to Dr. Crowning's office.
Pandorè had no choice but to climb back up the ladder. They led him at gunpoint back down the corridor to Dr. Crowning.
We caught him coming through the tunnels, sir.
Dr. Crowning stood up and glared into Pandorè's eyes.
Such a loyal friend and colleague. You have no idea what you are up against. And did you think that you could escape with your friends, save your daughter?
He sneered. The man with the twisted face, who Pandorè once knew as Dr. Ahaz, stood beside him now. Pandorè frowned at both of them in revulsion. Dr. Crowning's old wrinkles pressed around his youthful patch of flesh over his forehead, distorting his right eye.
Of all people, you should have known that once you open Pandora's box, there is no closing it. Now, finish placing these stones. We will gather more very shortly.
Pandorè began shifting the stones into the breastplate with a gun pointed at his head. The gemstones were glowing. Dr. Crowning looked down and saw another glow emanating from Pandorè's pocket. He reached over and snatched the chain, revealing Pandorè's pocket watch with its sardius stone radiating. Dr. Crowning breathed heavily with a fiendish grin.
You thought you could hide this from me.
He laughed, but then turned serious, pushing his face into Pandorè's.
Your father was a Jew, was he not? Your mother had given you 2 pieces of the stone, and you had given its twin to your precious Annika. How convenient that she was our first willing sacrifice, offering up her jewel and her daughter. I could have had her for myself, you know, but I used her for a better purpose.
Pandorè's face raged with anger.
You won't get away with this, you devil! Once the world finds out who you really are.
Who I really am. Who I really am.
He mocked.
You have no idea who I really am.
Dr. Crowning's entire face shifted into a demonic being, its edges writhing like a serpent's head, but it quickly shifted back.
The whole world is about to follow me, you will see.
He placed his bloody hand onto Pandorè's shoulder, which somehow shot crippling pain into Pandorè's spine. His body heaved, causing Pandorè to cry out. Dr. Ahaz smiled a sinister grin through his contorted, bloody mouth. Dr. Crowning withdrew his hand, and Pandorè's pain diminished. Again, he had the guard put the gun to Pandorè's head, with Dr. Ahaz standing nearby. Pandorè's hands shook as he continued placing the stones onto the breastplate, enclosing his sardius stone into the same setting as the others they had collected. The sardius stones merged once they were near one another, and their light radiated stronger. Pandorè noticed they were still missing several pieces, but had gathered the required amount for achieving new energy levels. Since Dr. Crowning and the others had trapped him under gunpoint, there would be no way to find Rachel now.
I must find a way to stop these lunatics' experiments, even if it costs me my life.
Pandorè thought to himself. Meanwhile, further down the tunnel, Rachel's vision remained dim. She was unable to think for herself, and the assistant and 2 doctors led her into a faintly lit room. She followed them calmly and quietly. Her will was not her own anymore. She allowed them to strap her into the white hospital bed. They propped her up to eye level and placed a metal contraption on the right side of her head. Inside of a round, white encasement was a dark, jagged machine. It had a robot precision arm and a cluster of mechanical fingers that narrowed to sharpened points. It could place small, delicate objects into its subject. Ishani supervised from an adjacent room behind transparent glass. Although her face had been mostly repaired, her red lips widened into a broad, toothy smile.
Now I want you to lie back and be sure to tell us everything you are feeling,
said one doctor. She used the machine to place a tube inside Rachel's right ear. Then she inserted something small, about the size of a grain of rice, into the tube that made its way deeper into Rachel's ear canal. Rachel began describing.
It's warm, like a liquid being poured into my ear. Everything is muffled.
The doctor took notes as if Rachel was her experiment. Ishani was captivated like she was enjoying her favorite movie. Then Rachel began to hear a penetrating noise.
I can hear it now. It sounds like a buzzsaw going through my brain.
Rachel, fully conscious yet sedated, remained calm even though she could not stop what was happening to her. She did not feel the pain she thought she should have felt, but she did feel the discomfort of a foreign object invading her skull. There was a sense of familiarity, as if this was not the first time Ishani had done this to her.
My toes are starting to feel a little numb.
The serenity in her voice surprised herself.
That is interesting,
said the doctor. Rachel lay there helplessly as the thing went further into her brain. It felt like it was about to reach her brainstem, but before it reached that point, it stopped. Then the doctors began unbuckling the straps. The assistant led her back to Ishani. Ishani approached her.
You can go now and try to save as many people as possible if that is your wish,
she said authoritatively.
However, you won't have to worry about Dr. Pandorè anymore. He has been taken care of.
Rachel knew immediately what that meant. She got up, feeling slightly dizzy, her ear ringing with the uncomfortable object that remained in her head. She staggered a little, and they allowed her to walk out the door as if nothing had happened. They gently brought her back through the tunnel and up the ladder into Pandorè's office. No one else was there.
Wait here for now until I return,
said Ishani. Rachel obediently sat down on Pandorè's couch. Ishani placed 2 guards outside the door and rushed back down the corridor toward Dr. Crowning's office. Just then, Joel rounded the corner, ducking from Ishani's view. He held Chester back before Chester saw her. Then he saw Ivan's office with the bloody trail leading inside its door. Chester sniffed it in concern and got up to follow. The door was unlocked, but they did not see a body inside. The trail ended at the couch. 2 robots, seeming to be cleaning up the place, came forward. One was tall, with a tube-shaped head but no face. The other was shorter, with menacing eyes that glowed in Joel's direction. The robots rolled forward to attack, expelling blades from their metallic arms. Chester lunged at the tall one and snapped off one of its arms. Joel, his gems glowing on his sword and shield, took no time to shave off the head of the smaller robot, its sparks flying into the air. He turned as the tall one pitched Chester across the floor and was coming for him. Joel swiped off its other arm. He finished it by lunging his sword through the control panel on its chest. His sword and shield grew dim, and Chester got up unharmed. Joel patted his head and began to look around the room.
Rachel!
There was no answer, just dead silence. No one was there. No one was in the attached study either. It was empty, except for something lying on the floor. It was Rachel's phone, and its screen was freshly cracked. He remembered her passcode and entered it. 12:25 for Christmas, her favorite holiday. Joel looked through her missed calls and messages, all from himself when he could get his phone to work. However, she had not opened them.
What has happened to her?
Joel thought desperately. Then he saw her last video. It was Dr. Crowning standing in front of the mirror in the next room. It looked as if he had placed his hand through the glass into another dimension. He saw pictures that she had taken of the onyx stone, among other things. He noticed that the dates and times were from when they were forced to separate at PRISM. However, he scrolled further and saw another picture of what seemed to be Dr. Crowning placing his hand through the mirror from the time they were in France.
Why didn't she show me this one?
Joel thought. Then he heard a voice.
Joel, is that you?
Joel looked around the empty room.
Rachel? Where are you?
Joel tried to whisper. Then he saw a mirror begin to glow. Rachel's reflection was there. Her eyes looked strange and dark, as if she were angry. They began glowing in a bright green.
I'm trapped! Please help me, Joel. I am stuck in Pandorè's office. Hurry!
Rachel?
Said Joel. Her image faded. Unbeknownst to him, it was Ishani luring him into her trap. Immediately, Joel and Chester cautiously headed back into the hall. Once the coast was clear, he and Chester sprinted toward Pandorè's office, but were surprised to see the guards.
What can we do now?
Joel thought, his breathing quickening.
Rachel has to be in there.
At least that is what the image had somehow told him through the mirror. He had already checked all the other rooms on his way to this area. The only room after this was the large mirror room. Joel tried to think of another way in. He could not picture Rachel going back into the tunnels. Suddenly, someone tapped Joel's shoulder.
Judas? What are you doing here?
Joel tried to keep quiet, but he could not believe his eyes. Chester began growling immediately, but Joel held him to keep him calm. His gems began to glow slightly on his shield and sword. Joel noticed Judas's scratched-up eyes and the dangling wires from his head.
I'm here to cover footage on that story, remember?
said Judas in a friendly tone.
Sorry I snapped at you, man. This place is crazy. What's with your getup?
Judas noticed the gems glowing. Joel did not have time for chit-chat.
Have you seen Rachel?
Yeah, she's in Pandora's office. They've placed guards there for some reason. I can get you access, though.
Judas motioned for Joel to follow, but Joel hesitated. However, Judas continued until the guards saw him. It was too late now. Once Joel followed and got to the door, they pointed their guns at him. Judas stepped aside. Chester was immediately in battle mode, growling at them ferociously.
Where is she? Where's Rachel?
Joel demanded.
You're no longer welcome here. This is private property.
The guard continued holding the gun toward Joel's face. Chester leaped for the guard, causing the gun to fire. It missed Joel and hit Judas in the stomach. He fell hard to the ground. However, to Joel's surprise, he got back up, undaunted by his wound. He reached for Joel's shield and slung it toward one of the guards, who caught it swiftly. Then Judas grabbed for the sword, but Joel pulled it back. The other guard shot Chester, and he yelped, dropping to the floor.
No! Chester!
Joel yelled as he reached for him. Other guards came pouring in, and they took Joel's sword. Then a familiar voice towered overhead.
I'll take that beauty, much obliged, Joel.
The guard tipped his hard hat. Joel recognized him.
Officer Larry?
It was one of the officers from Indiana who had been investigating Bill's death. He was one of them. Judas stood over Joel triumphantly as the guards held Joel to the ground. They tied his legs and arms as one yanked his head back by his hair.
Haven't you heard people say that the devil comes to you in the face of a friend?
Judas sneered.
You should not have let your guard down, buddy.
Let go of me!
Yelled Joel through his tears.
Chester!
Chester lay there, unresponsive, blood forming through the fur on his back. He looked desperately at Pandora's door.
Rachel! Rachel! Are you in there? Rachel!
Just then the door opened and the real Rachel stood right before him. Finally, Joel had found her.
Rachel!
He exclaimed in relief, and however her eyes were blank.
Do I know you?
She said.
Rachel, it's me, Joel!
He blinked his eyes in shock and confusion. He felt haunted by the sight of her wearing a blood-stained wedding dress.
What happened to you? Whose blood is that?
I am sorry, I do not know who you are.
She had no show of emotion despite the scene of chaos right in front of her. In the shadows, Ishani grinned in victory and hurried back to Dr. Crowning to prepare for their biggest moment.
I am with you.
A voice repeated in Joel's head. As the guards dragged Joel away, his face bent in confusion and anguish. Tears began to flow from Rachel's eyes. She could not understand why.